If Anakin Skywalker's full Force potential had been unlocked, he would have become the most powerful Force user in history, surpassing both Darth Sidious and Yoda. This alternate timeline would drastically alter the fate of the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker's journey through the Force took a remarkable turn when, early in his training, the Jedi Council decided not to limit him out of fear, but to nurture his gifts. Instead of constantly warning him about attachments and emotions, Master Qui-Gon Jinn, who had survived in this timeline, took Anakin under his wing. With Qui-Gon's guidance, Anakin learned to embrace his feelings without being consumed by them. The Jedi Temple buzzed with whispers as Anakin's abilities quickly surpassed all expectations. He moved objects the size of starships with ease. He foresaw outcomes far beyond the reach of any Jedi. Even Master Yoda paused during a meditation session, stunned by the ripples Anakin sent through the Force. During the Battle of Geonosis, Anakin single-handedly turned the tide. His lightsaber moved faster than the eye could follow, and his ability to sense danger saved hundreds of clones and Jedi. But it wasn't just his raw strength. His insight into the Force allowed him to detect deception, especially from Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. One evening in the Chancellor's office, as Palpatine tried to seed doubt in his mind, Anakin's gaze hardened. "You are the Sith Lord," Anakin said, his voice like steel. Palpatine's expression faltered. Before he could draw his lightsaber, Anakin's hand was at his throat, suspending him in the air. The Jedi Temple stood silent as Anakin brought Palpatine before the Council. The Sith plan had been exposed before it could take root. Order 66 was never issued. With Sidious unmasked and imprisoned, the Clone Wars ended swiftly. Count Dooku, realizing he had been nothing more than a pawn, surrendered. The galaxy witnessed a shift unlike any before. And at the center of it all stood Anakin Skywalker, his power fully realized, his purpose clear. He became the Jedi's greatest protector, not just a warrior, but a symbol of balance. The prophecy had come true, not through destruction, but through understanding. And for the first time in generations, the Force itself seemed at peace. On the battlefield above Coruscant, Count Dooku stood tall, lightsaber drawn, confident in his power. But this time, facing him was not the same impulsive Anakin Skywalker. This time, Anakin had been named a Jedi Master. His presence was calm, yet charged with an invisible storm. As Dooku lunged forward, Anakin moved with a precision and grace that startled even Obi-Wan Kenobi. Every strike from Dooku was deflected effortlessly. Anakin's eyes were focused, not with anger, but clarity. "You've grown strong," Dooku muttered, stepping back. Anakin didn't reply. His blue blade lit the space between them, humming with control. Dooku tried the same tactics that had once worked: Force lightning, feints, distractions. But they failed. Anakin anticipated every move. His lightsaber spun in perfect rhythm, disarming the Sith Lord with a clean strike that sent Dooku's weapon skidding across the floor. Palpatine watched from the side, his smile slowly fading. "Do it," the Chancellor urged. "Kill him." Anakin looked down at Dooku, who lay defenseless. His breathing slowed. "No," Anakin said calmly. "He will face justice." Dooku's eyes widened, not at the mercy, but at Anakin's strength in resisting the temptation. Obi-Wan stirred, injured but conscious, witnessing the moment with quiet awe. Later, aboard the Jedi Council chamber, Master Windu listened intently as Anakin recounted the encounter. "You held back, even when you had every reason not to," Windu said. "That is the sign of a true Jedi Master." With his full potential unlocked, Anakin became more than just a soldier. He became a guide, a protector, a symbol of discipline. The Clone Wars shifted. Under Anakin's leadership, battles ended faster. Civilian lives were spared. The morale of Republic forces soared. And Palpatine, his grip weakened. Anakin's decision to spare Dooku had ripple effects. Investigations deepened. Secrets began to unravel. Anakin stood in a new light, not as the chosen one feared by the Council, but as the Jedi Master who had overcome his inner storm. The galaxy felt the difference. A shift in destiny had begun. In the halls of the Galactic Senate, Chancellor Palpatine sensed his influence slipping. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master, was no longer a pawn to be played. The young Jedi had grown wise beyond his years, and more importantly, he had grown cautious. Palpatine invited Anakin to his private chambers once more, hoping to re-establish control. The room was dimly lit, with shadows dancing on the marble walls. "Anakin," Palpatine said smoothly, "I have always trusted you. You're the only Jedi who understands the need for true power." Anakin remained still. "I'm grateful for your friendship, Chancellor," he said, "but power without balance leads to ruin." Palpatine's smile tightened. "The Jedi don't see what's coming. They cling to outdated traditions. You could save Padmé. You could save them all." Anakin's expression darkened at the mention of Padmé. He had been having visions again, visions of her dying in childbirth. But this time, he had spoken openly to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Yoda. They guided him through his fears instead of shaming them. Palpatine reached for his last card. He stood slowly. "If you do not learn the dark side, she will die." Anakin's eyes narrowed. "You've seen these visions too?" he asked. Palpatine gave a slow nod. "Only through me can you save her." There was silence. The Force pulsed between them like a rising storm. Then, Anakin reached for his lightsaber, but not in fear. In clarity. "You're the Sith Lord," he said softly. "You've orchestrated all of this." Palpatine ignited his crimson blade with a snarl and lunged. But Anakin was ready. The clash was brief. Sparks flew as blue met red. But this time, Anakin fought not for fear, not for anger, but for peace. Palpatine fell, disarmed and surrounded as Masters Windu, Yoda, and Obi-Wan arrived. The truth had been revealed. The Sith Lord exposed. Anakin stood tall among them, not as a fallen knight tempted by darkness, but as the Jedi Master who resisted the most seductive evil the galaxy had ever known. The Republic had been spared a silent death, and the light within Anakin Skywalker had burned brighter than ever before. The Jedi Temple stood calm under the Coruscant night, but change was already sweeping through the galaxy. With Anakin Skywalker fully embracing his role as a Jedi Master, the prophecy of the Chosen One began to manifest, not through destruction, but through transformation. The Force, once clouded by war and deception, grew clearer. Jedi across the stars reported strange feelings, an inner peace returning, as if a great shadow had been lifted. Master Yoda meditated longer each day, silently observing the balance beginning to restore. It was not immediate, but it was real. Anakin traveled from world to world, not as a warrior of war, but as a symbol of hope. On Kashyyyk, he stood beside the Wookiees as peace talks were established. On Ryloth, he helped rebuild what war had shattered. He spoke to young Jedi at the temple with a new message. "Strength alone doesn't make a Jedi," he told them. "It's compassion. It's the will to protect others without falling into fear." Across the galaxy, the people began to feel the difference. Clone troopers, once bred only for battle, began receiving new orders, not to destroy, but to help rebuild the Republic. Anakin, now a member of the Jedi High Council, pushed for reform. He encouraged the Council to be more involved with the people, to listen rather than rule. His vision of the Jedi was one of guardianship, not superiority. Even former separatists began to see that peace was possible under new leadership. They requested talks, not with senators, but with Anakin himself. Padmé Amidala watched him from afar with awe. The man she loved had not vanished into power. He had grown into it. Each night, Anakin returned to her, weary but alive. The nightmares that once haunted him began to fade. The Force itself pulsed gently around him, no longer warning him of darkness, but guiding him forward. Anakin Skywalker, once feared to be the destroyer of the Jedi, had become its savior. And for the first time in a generation, the light side of the Force was winning. Within the corridors of the Jedi Temple, whispers grew louder, whispers not of betrayal, but of transformation. Anakin Skywalker, once doubted by the Council, now sat among them as an equal. His voice carried weight, not because of fear or prophecy, but because of wisdom earned through pain, victory, and reflection. Master Mace Windu, who had long held reservations about Anakin, now watched him with a quiet sense of respect. "He's not the same boy we once feared," Windu admitted to Master Yoda. "Correct. He is not," Yoda replied softly. "Grown, he has. A bridge between light and shadow, he may become." Anakin had begun leading missions with a different focus. Not to crush the enemy, but to end conflict before it started. His understanding of the Force now reached deeper than ever. He could sense fear in others, not to exploit it, but to calm it. On a mission to Mandalore, Anakin negotiated a ceasefire between the Republic and a fierce faction of warriors. He spoke not only as a Jedi, but as someone who understood the toll war takes on every soul. The Mandalorians, known for their strength and honor, saw in Anakin a warrior worthy of their trust. Even Ahsoka Tano, his former Padawan, returned to aid him after hearing stories of his transformation. "You've changed," Ahsoka said with a small smile. "But you still talk too much." Anakin chuckled, pulling her into a hug. "I missed you too, Snips." Together, they brought a message of unity to war-torn systems. Not all battles were fought with lightsabers. Some were won with courage, patience, and the willingness to understand. Palpatine, now stripped of power, sat alone in his cell beneath the Republic judiciary. His plans had unraveled, undone not by anger or rebellion, but by peace. The galaxy, once teetering on the edge of collapse, began to heal. Anakin Skywalker had not fallen to the darkness. Instead, he became the Force's greatest answer to it. The Jedi Council stood in deep meditation, sensing a change in the balance of the Force. Across the galaxy, the shadows that had long obscured the truth were beginning to lift. The rise of Anakin Skywalker as a Jedi Master had ignited something greater than hope. It had awakened the will to fight for a better future. But in the corners of the Sith, not all was calm. Darth Maul, thought dead and forgotten, had gathered remnants of the Shadow Collective. Whispers of betrayal among the Sith began to stir. Count Dooku, once confident in his place beside Darth Sidious, now feared replacement. He had seen Anakin's power firsthand. He had felt the weight of his mercy. And in the Sith, mercy was a poison. Palpatine, trapped and imprisoned, still reached out through the dark side. But Anakin was no longer the vulnerable apprentice once torn by fear. He had learned to resist temptation. To some, that made him a threat. A new plan formed within the shadows. Darth Maul, seeking revenge, joined forces with a disillusioned Dooku. Their goal was not to destroy the Jedi, but to claim the dark side for themselves. When Anakin received word of the betrayal, he did not rush into anger. He gathered his allies, Ahsoka Tano, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Master Plo Koon. Together, they prepared for a confrontation that could end the Sith forever. On the moon of Mustafar, the two Sith lords waited. The battle that followed was unlike any the galaxy had seen. Red clashed with blue, the air thick with fire and fury. Anakin faced Dooku again, but this time there was no hesitation, no fear. "Your betrayal ends here," Anakin said, his lightsaber steady. Beside him, Ahsoka battled Maul, the two locked in a deadly dance of speed and skill. In the end, it was unity, not rage, that gave the Jedi victory. Maul fell. Dooku surrendered. Anakin stood not as a broken man seeking vengeance, but as the Jedi Master who refused to let darkness define him. And the Force, at long last, began to find balance once more. In the stillness of the Jedi Council chamber, Anakin Skywalker stood before the gathered masters, his voice calm but firm. "The Jedi Code must evolve," he said, eyes meeting each of them. "We cannot protect the galaxy by closing our hearts to it." The room was silent. Master Mundi exchanged a glance with Master Yoda. Even Mace Windu, once the most rigid in doctrine, leaned forward with quiet interest. Anakin continued, "Attachment does not mean possession. Love is not a weakness, it's a strength. We've taught generations to fear emotion, but I say we teach them balance instead. There had been a time when these words would have been dismissed, maybe even punished. But this was a new era. The war had ended. The Sith were defeated, and the Force called for a new beginning. Master Yoda spoke slowly. Much to unlearn, we all have. But perhaps wisdom in your words there is. The Jedi Temple opened its halls to a new generation of students, not just from the core worlds, but from distant systems once ignored. Anakin led the charge, revising the Jedi Code with the help of scholars and wise masters. Ahsoka Tano returned to the Order, not as a Padawan, but as a teacher. Her insight into what it meant to walk away and return became a cornerstone of the new philosophy. Younglings were encouraged to meditate not just on serenity, but also on empathy. They were taught to understand pain, not run from it. Obi-Wan Kenobi, proud but humble, told the students stories of the Clone Wars, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in the cost of forgetting who they were. And Anakin, the Chosen One, trained them in both strength and vulnerability. He reminded them every day, fear is natural. It's what we do with it that matters. Across the stars, this new Jedi Code began to inspire. Even systems once skeptical of the Jedi began to reach out again. The Force was no longer seen as a strict path of denial, but as a guide toward balance, understanding, and peace. And through it all, Anakin Skywalker stood as the living example of what it meant to truly bring balance to the Force. On the outer rim world of Mandalore, the fires of war had dimmed, but the embers still burned in silence. Anakin Skywalker stood at the edge of a great hall, cloaked not in armor, but in purpose. The Mandalorians, proud and fierce, waited for him to speak. They had known Jedi before. Some they respected, others they distrusted. Ate with them, spoke to their children. He listened. Over time, distrust turned into curiosity into understanding. And when a rogue faction attacked the capital, it was Anakin and Bo-Katan who fought side by side. Their unity turned the tide. In the aftermath, Mandalore agreed to join a stronger alliance, not beneath the Jedi, but beside them. Clone veterans who had been left without a cause found a new purpose among the Mandalorian ranks. Together, they formed a peacekeeping force unlike anything the Republic had seen. Obi-Wan Kenobi visited the new Mandalore and was stunned by the transformation. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said. Anakin smiled. "Neither did I." The Mandalorian banners flew beside the Jedi Order on distant planets. And for the first time in centuries, warriors who once fought now stood united in defense of peace. It was not through power that Anakin forged this bond, but through trust. And in doing so, he reshaped the destiny of two proud legacies. In the calm that followed war, there was a silence across the galaxy unlike any before. The Force, once clouded and unbalanced, began to shift. Not toward light, not toward darkness, but toward something new. Balance. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master, walked the halls of the rebuilt Jedi Temple in quiet thought. He had seen what both extremes could do, what obsession with order could become, and what surrender to chaos could destroy. Now he taught something different. He spoke to younglings not only of peace, but of purpose. He reminded them that emotions were part of being alive, and it was not wrong to feel, but dangerous to ignore what one felt. The Force began to respond. Worlds that had been silent for decades reached out to the Jedi once more. Old temples once dormant lit up with energy. Visions returned to Jedi who had long been disconnected. Even the living Force and the cosmic Force, once divided concepts, seemed to move in harmony. Yoda, sensing this change from his place on Dagobah, smiled for the first time in years. "A balance found. The Chosen One has," he whispered to the trees. But it wasn't only Jedi who noticed. Across the stars, those sensitive to the Force, from smugglers to scholars, began to feel a new clarity. Some called it destiny. Others called it healing. Ahsoka Tano stood beside Anakin in meditation. She opened her eyes slowly and said, "For the first time, it doesn't feel like we're pulling against something." Anakin nodded. It feels like we're flowing with it. And in that moment, he realized that bringing balance wasn't about eliminating darkness or clinging to light. It was about acknowledging both, accepting both, and guiding the next generation to walk the path in between. The Jedi Code was not just rewritten. It was reborn, an order grounded not in fear of the past, but in understanding of the present. And for the galaxy, long torn between extremes, it meant hope. True, lasting hope, because balance had finally been achieved, and the one who brought it stood ready to protect it. The shadows within the Sith ranks began to stir restlessly. Anakin Skywalker's rise as a Jedi Master and his growing influence across the galaxy had disrupted more than just the Jedi Order. It had cracked the very foundation of the Sith's secret plans. Darth Sidious, once confident in his manipulation, watched from the shadows as his former apprentice slipped further from his grasp. Where once Anakin's anger was a tool, it had now become his shield, tempered by wisdom, anchored by love, and guided by the living force. But Sidious did not stand alone. He had other agents, other plans, and one of them was Darth Tyrannus, Count Dooku. Learning of Anakin's growing power, Dooku returned from exile to confront the truth. Sidious had chosen a new path, and Dooku was now expendable. But instead of bowing, he plotted. He reached out to other disillusioned Sith, Dark Force users scattered across the Outer Rim, whispering a betrayal of opportunity. They would not follow Sidious. They would rise on their own. While the Jedi celebrated peace, a shadow alliance began to form, hidden deep in abandoned temples and ruined fortresses. But the Force is always in motion. Anakin felt the disturbance before the Jedi Council even discovered the threat. His meditations were restless, his dreams clouded. Something was coming. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood beside him as Anakin explained his vision, a dark storm of betrayal not from outside, but within. Together, they led a covert mission to investigate. What they found was alarming. Former Sith apprentices, dark acolytes, even corrupted clones had begun to rally under a new cause, the belief that the Sith should no longer serve a master, but themselves. The betrayal in the Sith ranks had begun. But this time, the Jedi were not blind. Anakin, once seen as a risk, had become their greatest defender. And as the dark side fractured, the light remained united. A war was coming, not between Jedi and Sith alone, but between the past and the future. And Anakin Skywalker stood ready, not as a pawn of prophecy, but as the guardian of the balance he had fought so hard to restore. The war had ended, but the galaxy was far from quiet. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master, stood on the steps of the Jedi Temple, watching transports arrive from distant systems. He had seen too much loss to believe that peace would simply keep itself. Every world, every person still carried scars from the conflict. The Council, once hesitant to grant him this rank, now relied on him for guidance. Anakin moved through the temple with a presence both calm and commanding. Younglings gathered to hear him speak, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He taught them that the Force was more than light and dark. It was the breath between them, the choice each being made every day. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Obi-Wan Kenobi noticed the change in his former apprentice. The restless energy was still there, but it no longer burned to consume, it burned to protect. Missions to remote planets became less about control and more about understanding. Anakin would listen to farmers as carefully as he did senators. He would stand in the dust of war-torn villages and promise that the Jedi were there to serve, not to rule. News of this spread faster than any official decree. Worlds that had closed themselves off to the Republic began to reopen. Former enemies sent envoys, curious about this new Jedi Master who spoke of balance without arrogance. Even those who once served the Separatists began to wonder if perhaps the Jedi had changed. But Anakin knew better than to think change came without resistance. He could feel the dark side moving in the corners of the galaxy, looking for a way to twist this fragile hope. Yet he also knew something else. He was no longer fighting that battle alone. Ahsoka Tano, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and even masters who had once doubted him now stood firmly by his side. The galaxy was not perfect. It might never be, but the people had begun to believe again. And belief, Anakin realized, was stronger than fear. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like a promise.